Two people work the identical job. Same title, same company, same paycheck landing in their account on the same day of the month. One of them retires at 52, the other is still working at 67. Nothing about their income explains the 15-year gap. One number does, and it is not the one most people spend their career chasing. That number is savings rate, the percentage of take-home pay that gets saved and invested instead of spent. It sounds like a minor detail next to something as significant as income. It is not a minor detail. It is, according to the research behind early retirement planning, the single most powerful variable in the entire equation. More powerful than income, more powerful than investment returns, more powerful than almost any other financial decision a person makes across an entire career. Here is why savings rate carries that much weight, and why two people can share every number on a pay stub and still end up living two completely different financial lives. Savings rate works on both sides of the equation at once, which is what makes it mathematically different from every other lever available. A higher savings rate means more money invested today, which accelerates compounding starting immediately. But it also means lower spending, which simultaneously shrinks the total amount of money eventually needed to sustain that lifestyle in retirement. Every other financial improvement, a raise, a better investment return, a lucky market year, only pulls on one side of the equation. Savings rate pulls on both at the exact same time, which is why its effect on the retirement timeline is not linear. It is closer to exponential. Run the actual numbers using the two coworkers. The first coworker earns $85,000 a year, takes home roughly $65,000 after tax, and saves 15% of it. A common, entirely respectable savings rate by national standards. That is $9,750 a year going into investments, with $55,250 funding the current lifestyle. At a 7% real return, reaching a portfolio capable of replacing that lifestyle indefinitely takes, by the math behind this exact calculation, somewhere in the range of 35 to 40 years from a standing start. Retirement at a traditional age, right on the schedule, almost everyone assumes is simply how it works. The second coworker earns the identical $85,000, takes home the identical $65,000, and saves 40% of it instead of 15%. That is $26,000 a year invested, with $39,000 funding the lifestyle. Two things happen simultaneously that do not happen for the first coworker. Nearly 3 times as much money compounds every single year. And because the lifestyle costs $39,000 instead of $55,250, the total portfolio required to sustain it, the freedom number covered in a previous video, is meaningfully smaller to begin with. Both effects point the same direction at once. The result is not a moderately faster retirement. According to the research on savings rate-driven timelines, a jump from roughly 15% to 30 to 40% can cut the years to retirement figure from over 40 years down to somewhere between 15 and 20 years. The exact 15-year gap this video opened with, produced entirely by one number, with the salary held perfectly constant the entire time. The reason this feels almost impossible the first time the math is actually run is that spending reduction gets counted only once in most people's mental accounting as less lifestyle today. It is never counted twice, which is what it actually does. Less spending today and a smaller target tomorrow, compounding together instead of separately. This is where lifestyle inflation, already covered on this channel, reveals its true cost. It is not simply spending a bit more as income grows. It is quietly working against both halves of the savings rate equation at once, reducing what gets invested today while simultaneously inflating the target that eventually has to be reached. A person whose spending rises in step with every raise can earn significantly more over a career than a lower spending coworker and still retire later, because the number driving the timeline was never income. It was always the gap between income and spending, expressed as a percentage. The nonlinear nature of this relationship is worth sitting with, because it explains why savings rate produces headline-grabbing numbers that sound almost fictional until the underlying math is checked. At a 15% savings rate from zero, the realistic timeline to full financial independence commonly runs 35 to 43 years. Essentially the traditional working career, start to finish. At a 25% savings rate, the timeline compresses to roughly 25 to 30 years. At a 40% savings rate, it drops to somewhere around 17 to 20 years. And at a 50% or higher savings rate, an aggressive but genuinely achievable rate for many dual-income households or single earners without dependents, the timeline can fall to 15 to 17 years, deep fire community territory, where retiring in your late 30s or early 40s from a standard professional salary becomes a realistic outcome rather than a fantasy. None of these figures require an unusually high income. They require an unusually deliberate gap between income and spending, sustained consistently over years, which is a behavior, not a salary bracket. A teacher earning $65,000 who saves half of it will out-retire a doctor earning $300,000 who saves almost none of it, because the doctor's enormous income is entirely absorbed by an enormous lifestyle, leaving the actual determining variable, the gap, at close to zero, regardless of how impressive the income figure looks on paper. This is also why comparing financial progress to a coworker's visible lifestyle is close to meaningless. The car in the parking lot, the vacations posted online, the apartment upgrade, none of it reveals savings rate. And savings rate is the only number that actually predicts the outcome 15 or 20 years from now. Two people can look financially identical from the outside for a decade and be on completely different trajectories the entire time. Invisible until one of them simply stops needing to work and the other does not. The practical version of this is not about hitting 50% overnight. It is about treating the gap between income and spending as the primary metric to move, more consequential than chasing a slightly higher paying job, more consequential than trying to time investment returns, more consequential than almost any other single decision available. Every previous video on this channel about high interest debt, lifestyle inflation, budgeting structure, and automated investing was underneath the surface a video about protecting or widening this exact gap. This is the number all of it was quietly building toward. Calculating an individual's savings rate takes one division: annual amount saved and invested divided by annual take-home income multiplied by 100. Most people have never calculated it and have no idea whether their current number is 5%, 15%, or 30%, which means most people have never actually seen the single number most responsible for when their working life ends. Consider what moving that number by even 10 percentage points actually requires, because the path is less dramatic than the outcome suggests. Going from 15% to 25% on a $65,000 take-home income means finding an additional $6,500 a year, roughly $540 a month. That is not a heroic sacrifice. It is frequently the exact size of the gap this channel has already identified in other videos. The difference between a 0.45% and a 4.5% savings account redirected fully into investing. The cost of carrying an average car payment instead of a modest used vehicle. A handful of forgotten subscriptions finally cancelled. None of these individually feel like the kind of decision that moves a retirement date by a decade. Together, sustained for years, they are exactly that kind of decision. This is also why the order of operations covered in a previous video matters so directly here. Eliminating high-interest debt first is not a separate goal from raising the savings rate. A balance sitting at 22% interest is actively working against both halves of the savings rate equation simultaneously, the same way lifestyle inflation does. Every dollar redirected from that interest payment toward investing does the same double duty already described. It compounds starting today, and it does not inflate the eventual target the way spending does. The habits already covered on this channel were never separate strategies. They were all quietly serving this one number the entire time. Same salary, same job, same paycheck landing on the same day of the month. The 15-year gap was never a mystery. It was one uncalculated percentage, sitting in plain sight the entire time. Drop a comment with the calculated savings rate after running the math. The next video covers the specific, realistic steps to move that number up by 5 or 10 points without the spending cuts that trigger the same rebound effect covered in the budgeting video.